No manna appeared on the day they first ate from the crops of the land, and it was never seen again. So from that time on, the Israelites ate from the crops of Canaan. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright. So we're looking at Joshua chapter 5 right now. Context basically is that the Israelites have now crossed the Jordan River, have kind of more officially entered the Promised Land, but they still have a lot of, spreading, settling, and honestly conquering to do before it's really, theirs. And that's probably going to start soon, within the next couple of chapters, I'd imagine. But yeah. So with that out of the way, keeping all that information in mind, I suppose we can start reading this chapter. So, Joshua chapter 5. When all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings who lived along the Mediterranean coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan River so the people of Israel could cross, they lost heart and were paralyzed with fear because of them. As if what we heard from the spies that went into Jericho wasn't already indicating that. Because, they had heard from Rahab that the people of Jericho were scared of the Israelites because of what God had already done for them. Bringing them across the Red Sea, helping them conquer and defeat a couple of kings east of the Jordan River. So, yeah, either the fear is increasing, and or it's further spreading throughout the other kingdoms of Canaan / the Promised Land. Footnote there. Hebrew says along the sea, referring to the Mediterranean Sea, although it might not have been called the Mediterranean Sea then, but in any case, the original Hebrew says along the sea, which still has the same meaning, because it's not like along the sea would mean smack dab in the middle of it. So, same thing, basically. Okay. Verse 2. At that time the Lord told Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise this second generation of Israelites." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the entire male population of Israel at Gibeath Haraloth. Not sure the pronunciation there. I'm finding this command odd, because you would think they would already have been circumcised. That's part of, the whole being descended from Abraham covenant thing that was supposed to be passed on from all the generations after him. But, with the previous generation's rebelliousness and other things like that, I suppose it's not completely out of the question that they also forsook their assumed responsibilities in that regard. But yeah, heck of a time to do that. You would think they would have wanted to do that before crossing the Jordan River? Wouldn't that have also been part of, kind of purifying themselves? I don't know. The order of events here doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but whatever. I'm not God, so I refrain from passing judgment on the circumstances. Footnote. Or circumcise the Israelites a second time. Okay, that could mean something a little bit different, but like you wouldn't circumcise somebody twice. That's kind of impossible. Like you don't just you don't just grow stuff back like that. At least not to my knowledge. Anyway, let's not dig into that too much. Footnote C says Gibeath Haraloth means hill of foreskins. Well, yeah, makes sense. The very literal meanings of things. Anyway, okay, I've done a lot of talking for only 2 verses thus far. Now let me continue on to verse 4. Joshua had to circumcise them because all the men who were old enough to fight in battle when they left Egypt had died in the wilderness. Those who left Egypt had all been circumcised, but none of those born after the Exodus during the years in the wilderness had been circumcised. Makes sense of the previous stuff. The Israelites had traveled in the wilderness for 40 years until all the men who were old enough to fight in battle when they left Egypt had died. For they had disobeyed the Lord, and the Lord vowed he would not let them enter the land he had sworn to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Okay, the change in tense there is a little odd, but whatever. Or not tense, but like going from first person, from like third person to first person there is a little odd. But anyway. So Joshua circumcised their sons, those who had grown up to take their father's places, for they had not been circumcised on the way to the promised land. After all the males had been circumcised, they rested in the camp until they were healed. Okay. So at least they, crossed the Jordan River, did this, and then rested before going and fighting anybody. But, yeah, that... okay, that at least makes it a little less like, why would you do it in this order? But also, like I said before, this generation of Israelites not being circumcised before, it means that, yeah, that is probably just the more obvious answer for what was happening here in verse 2. Not that anyone was being circumcised a second time, because that's kind of impossible. Anyway, verse 9. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the shame of your slavery in Egypt." So that place has been called Gilgal to this day. Same place that was called Gibeath Haraloth, or maybe slightly off, like in a slightly different location from there. Gilgal sounds like the Hebrew word galal, meaning to roll. Rolled away the shame. Gotcha. Again, literal naming. Verse 10. While the Israelites were camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, they celebrated Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the first month. The very next day they began to eat unleavened bread and roasted grain harvested from the land. No manna appeared on the day they first ate from the crops of the land, and it was never seen again. So from that time on, the Israelites ate from the crops of Canaan. So, yeah, the manna was basically the food that God was providing them all throughout their time in the wilderness. It was described as sort of like flakes that would have been almost left behind from the dew or something to that effect. But yeah, so very, very light, flaky kind of stuff the manna was. But now that they've crossed over into Canaan and have other crops from there to harvest and eat and whatnot, there is not so much of a need for the manna So then, like it said, from that time on, well, they ate from those crops and also did not see the manna ever again. But there was still supposed to be some kept in like a dish or something in the Ark of the Covenant, if I'm remembering right. Yeah, I don't know exactly how far off it would have been from like a cereal kind of thing there, Jacob, but that's the closest thing I could think of. Like, imagine Frosted Flakes, but maybe even thinner than that. And probably, not all sugary and stuff. Footnote. In reference to the 14th day of the first month. This day in the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar occurred in late March, April, or early May. Lunar calendar worked different than our modern calendars. So yeah, anyway. So they camped at Gilgal just, after crossing the Jordan River, and they celebrated Passover. Again, kind of interesting timing, because you would think they'd want to, be pretty much ready to fight right away after crossing the Jordan River. That's kind of what they crossed over there to do, is to conquer the promised land. But nope, God's having them, slow down, make sure that they're ready, and, that their hearts are set on following God, I guess, at least to some extent, before they then go and do all this fighting. Okay. Few verses left. I think I might just read this entire last section here. Does that continue on into the next chapter? No, it does not. Okay. All right. Verse 13. When Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, "Are you friend or foe?" "Neither one," he replied. "I am the commander of the Lord's army." At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. "I am at your command," Joshua said. "What do you want your servant to do?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did what he was told, or as he was told. Okay, so that whole taking off the sandals definitely gives flashbacks to the scene with Moses in the burning bush. God told him to remove his sandals because it was holy ground. And, kind of working back a little bit from there. It's interesting that the commander of the Lord's army says he's not, on a particular side, so to speak, in this matter. You would think, being the commander of the Lord's army, and this being, the Lord's people, the Israelites, that it would say that he, is at least somewhat of a friend. But at least not, it's not said very directly, even if it's kind of implied based on, whoever this was commanding the Lord's army. But seemingly at the mention of the Lord's name, Joshua, pays respects as he would any assumed representative of the Lord, because you don't worship a god and, just completely brush off representatives as if they're nothing. So, yeah, it's an interesting little interaction there. But, I don't know. Okay, taking a moment to possibly read a little too much, air quote, into the start of verse 14 here. This guy is saying that he's neither friend nor foe. That almost makes me think it's, that it was kind of contingent upon Joshua and the Israelites and how they acted. Because, if they start disobeying the Lord, you'd assume the commander of the Lord's army is not going to be on their side then. So, that's just my thought. Again, might be reading a little too much into that, but it's not necessarily out of the question. Especially given previous instances of God expressing a desire to basically eliminate all the Israelites because of their disobedience. Anyway, I digress. So that does it for Joshua chapter 5, I guess. Okay, so they crossed the Jordan River and immediately very quickly did a couple of things that basically, kind of solidified their commitment to God to some extent. Those things being circumcising all the men and having Passover, because that just happened to be the time of year that it was, I guess. And then there was kind of an interesting / odd exchange with somebody who was supposed to be commander of the Lord's armies. Still not 100% sure what to make of that, but I will say, though, regarding that, it just kind of further goes to show that, there are all sorts of things that God is doing all around us that we might not always realize. But anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. If you see this over on Rumble, give me a follow there. Make sure you look down in the description below the video to get information on social media pages and how to find and follow those. And down below that, leave your comments with any thoughts you have. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But until then, stay cool, people.